I've read somewhere that booze inhibits the part of your brain that creates dreams. Maybe that's a load of crap. Maybe nightmares are born somewhere else. Who's to say? All I know is that I was pissed drunk when I collapsed on my mattress that night. Yet, I'm back here all the same. Back in this rotting wooden carcass. Yellow, late afternoon daylight slices lazily through the gaps between the rotten boards. Steady, continuous flecks of bloated dust dance through the rays. The dirt floor around me is strewn with ancient browning hay, stale and brittle, stinking with the dried horse piss of a century and a half. It's a spacious, musty room that I stand in, probably 60 yards long from the front door to the back, and at least as wide. The ceiling is high and vaulted, as you'd expect from a place like this. The apotheosis of eerie, long-forgotten, off-the-highway wooden barns. This one sits at the top of a gentle hill, at the end of a yawning, breezy field, like a decomposing specter. A pointed tower extended off the roof, sagging drunkenly to one side, curling slightly back in on itself, like a giant spindly index finger. Like it's coaxing you to pull your car over to the shoulder and take a leisurely jaunt across the swaying grass. Like it has something to show you. Hell, I know it does. It's shown me before. Right on cue, the shadows around me are doing a different dance than that. The creaks and groans are a bit less passive, a bit more aggressive. The massive room around me is not so empty and spacious. Then there's a louder creak from above, loud enough to sound as though it's calling my attention, and I raise my head towards the ceiling for a look. I'm never able to stop myself. Bodies, dozens of them, hanging from the withered, crisscrossing rafters. They're strung up from the downbeam like haphazard tree ornaments, some tight against the ceiling, some with enough slack in their fraying ropes to hang down within 10 feet of my head. They're in various stages of decay. I see one that's especially wilted, with shrunken black, lifeless skin. It swings inconsequentially, almost weightless. The face looks like it's sewn together from dried leaves, but there's another to its right, hanging 15 feet below it, and it's much newer, bloated, purple and slick, ready to burst like a balloon and fill the air with noxious gas. The sane thing would be to turn tail and run, screaming, hands over my head, out the big wooden door and back to where I came from. But again, dream logic is steering this ship now, and I didn't actually come from anywhere. Another sound joins the symphony of woody creaks and groans. Dull footfalls, one after the other. I can picture the worn-down boot heels from the sound alone. I force my eyes open slowly, ignoring every fiber of my being that screams and begs to keep them closed. Nightmares don't allow for blissful ignorance. The figure emerges slowly from the farthest horse stall on the left wall, sauntering more than walking, and at first I have to squint my eyes to make out any sharp lines, any defining features. But there aren't any. It's only a shadow, and an impossible one at that. There's no light coming in at the right angle to create one. But it's here, all the same. It's tall, stretching what must have been 7 feet up the wall, and thin. If I were looking at a real living person, I might think he must be malnourished. But even again, I doubt that traditional food is the kind he's interested in. The shadow's right arm swings casually at its side. His left is raised up, loosely gripping some protrusion that juts from his left shoulder. An unmistakable shape sits atop his head, a wide-brimmed hat, the front brim bent skyward. A thin, spindly shadow extends from his mouth. Piece of straw, perhaps. He walks slowly, paying me no mind, till he reaches the middle of the far wall. Then he stops, leans forward slightly, and spits. A shadowy streak of phantom tobacco juice splats to the ground. The shadow stands still, perfectly still, too still, until I'm almost sure that it won't move again. And it doesn't move. Not really, anyway. What it does next feels less like moving and more like morphing, developing like a Polaroid picture from blank darkness into full, vivid reality. Suddenly the shadow is full, 3 dimensions, and the transformation was so understated and ephemeral that I didn't catch how or when it began. It looks like a man, just as tall and gaunt as his shadow had suggested, and dressed from head to toe in dusty, tattered clothes that have no discernible color. His forearms and face are the only exposed skin, if you could call whatever revolting membrane something like this wears as skin, and they're caked in grime and soot. A large, droopy mustache sits above his lip, which is curled upward and backward to reveal something between a sneer and a snarl. What shards of teeth exist are rotten, brown, and sunken, like cockroach soldiers standing at attention. His left eye is covered by a leather patch. His right gleams electric yellow through the dim barn. His left hand is still raised, loosely gripping what I can now see as a rope, coiled around his left shoulder like a scaly, undead snake. I'm not afraid now. Afraid is too simple a word for it. I'm frozen, paralyzed by a cocktail of terror and revulsion that fills me from my feet to my scalp. He's almost 50 feet from me, but I can smell him, sour, dank, alive in the most nauseating way, 'cause he absolutely shouldn't be. We stand there, facing each other, immobile as marble statues, for what has to be a full minute. Neither of us make a sound. Then, voices do come, but not from either of us. They come instead from those figures swinging slowly above us, synchronized like a hellish choir, raspy and dry, not generated by moving lips or breathing lungs, but emanating from them as a collective. He's the lanky, leering Lasso man, got a twirling rope and a steady hand. His rope's his brush, the barn's his easel, and he's pegged you, boy, for a yellow weasel. The Lasso man remained perfectly still, but his yellow eye glimmers with satisfaction. His puppets are speaking on his behalf, and it pleases him. He don't like a man with a jelly spine. He'd like to kill you. He'd like it fine. Around your neck, then around the oak. He'll yank you up. You'll squeal, you'll choke. You're meek, you're soft. Your manhood soured. You're pathetic, boy. You're an awful coward. Can't make the cut. Ain't even one. You're lost cause, boy, and your time is done. Now, after what feels like a minor eternity, he moves. His left arm drops from his side, bringing the coiled rope with it. With the practiced nonchalance of many years, he draws out an end, which has been knotted with a loose loop. His time is fast. His rope swings long. He's waiting for you to prove him wrong. It'll never happen. You won't never show. You ain't a man who'll stand toe to toe. The lasso's loop, now hanging patiently, begins to sway back and forth, slowly at first. Then it swings faster, longer. After a few swings, he cracks his wrist, sending it up, around in a full loop. It fires up above his head, then brings it back around so it scrapes the floor with a meaty thunk that reports violently through the barn. His eyes gleam brighter. He brings the loop around again. Thwack! Crusty straw scatters at the impact, a puff of dust swirling with it. He sees you well. He sees you whole. He sees the depths of your timid soul. Try to stand your ground. rebuke the shame, but you'll swing with us, boy, all the same. He swings his rope steadily, and the thwack accompanies the chant like a monotone. He's the lanky, leering Lasso man. Face him down if you think you can. Got just one leering, jeering eye. He'll use it, boy, to watch you die. The phantom continues to search me with his singular burning eye. No visible movement, but the lazy crack of his wrist. What happens now? Renewed fright pours through me like a wave of cold water, but I decide I don't want to stick around to find out. I close my eye again, clench my fist, trying to will myself out from the dark corner of my subconscious, back to the waking world, and to an undoubtedly sweaty set of bed sheets. But the barn refuses to fade, stubbornly continuing to exist around me. The bodies above swing, erratic arcs through the rafters, crashing wildly into each other. The fresher ones impact with wet slaps, the older ones with dusty thuds and the crack of bones. Now, their impossible, mouthless voices are back again, not reciting chants this time, but making insane guttural noises, screams, laughter, I can't tell. Screaming, creaking, slapping, groaning, and thudding. Dull boot heels thudding together as they move towards me. He's done waiting. He's coming. I spin around, my feet finally free of their fear-induced anchor, and I run for the door behind me. I skid on hay as I reach it and start yanking on the iron handle. At first it doesn't budge. 100 years of grime and rust have settled it stubbornly into place. The footsteps are louder now, closer. The rope hits the ground again, and I feel a gust of air from the swing. I give the handle one last desperate yank, and the door relents. It whines angrily open, and the afternoon sun streaks in through the gap that can't be more than a foot wide. It's wide enough. I squeeze through sideways, feeling splinters tear through my shirt on both sides, lodging into my chest and back. I try to run, but my foot catches on the edge of the door, throwing me to the ground in a heap. I'm up instantly, running harder than I have since my Little League days. The 300 yards to the road may as well be 300 miles. I make my arms and legs pump together. Within seconds, the barnyard dirt beneath my feet becomes grass. Now that I've reached the field, I feel a jolt of elated relief. It's short-lived, though. A sudden whoosh joins the sound of my panting, and something falls neatly around my head, settling on my shoulders. Then the loop yanks tight around my neck, and I'm stopped cold. My feet kick crazily in the air in front of me as I'm whiplashed backwards. My panting is stifled by a choke, and I feel my neck crack as it's yanked from its proper place. I'm on my back. He's dragging me back towards the barn. Rocks and stickers tear hungrily through my clothes as I grind across the stiff prairie grass, but I begin to slide more easily once I'm back on the dirt. I claw desperately at my neck, trying and failing to get even a finger between the rope and my throat. No use. I'm not seeing real images anymore, just cloudy, fading shades. The glow of sunlight disappears immediately as I'm yanked back into the darkness of the barn. Finally, the pulling stops, and I'm left to lay still for a moment. A bit of pressure is released. I manage a couple of raspy breaths of stale air. There are thundering boot heels again. They stop a couple of feet from my head, and I can feel him standing over me. I can smell him, like rotting citrus and stale tobacco. He yanks me upward. My neck cracks again as more ligaments are torn out of place, and I scramble to my knees in an effort to keep him from ripping my head clear from my shoulders. His hands hold me there, and after my eyes get another few seconds to readjust to the darkness, he crouches down so we're face to face. I use the last of my strength to clench my eyes shut. I don't want his grimy skin and glowing eye to be the last thing I ever see. He's close now, his nose only inches from mine, and he breathes heavily. I've never known a smell to be so horrible. When he speaks, his voice is humming, a growl, a legion of locusts buzzing in unison. Do you know this rope was made for runners, boy? There's another whoosh as he casts the free end of the rope over the rafter, looping it easily over one of the higher beams. And now I'm being lifted a few feet at a time. He's hoisting me up to join the others. My feet are barely kicking, my arms hanging uselessly at my side. I have no strength left to claw at the noose. My vision fades completely now as all the oxygen leaves my brain and the world around me grows dim. I lose all feeling in my legs, now my hands, now my chest. My hearing is the last thing to go, but just before it does, I hear his ghoulish choir begin their chant again. He's the lanky Leery and Lasso man. Now, and only now, do I finally wake up, choking and shivering, tangled in a set of bed sheets which are completely soaked. The barn and all its horrors are gone, but their effects linger like an afterimage on my soul. I sit upright, trying and failing to slow my heart. My face is slick with tears and snot, and as I catch my breath, I realize with some embarrassment that sweat isn't the only reason the sheets are damp. Not that there's anyone else to feel embarrassment for. I feel out at the other side of the bed to confirm that it's empty, and of course it is. Even my bunny rabbit upstairs neighbors are quiet as church mice tonight. God, I'm so damn alone. And God, my place is so damn quiet. Since there's no other person to grab onto, I settle for my old baseball bat that I always keep leaned against the nightstand. I grip its rubber handle and hold it to my chest, enjoying the cold feel of the aluminum on my skin. It's relatively small, the one I swung during my 12-year-old session. Over the next 5 and final years of my baseball career, I owned a variety of bigger ones, heavier ones, better ones. Still, there's something about this one that maintained its special appeal to me, because I miss that season sometimes. I miss being 12, the year I batted a .486, pulled straight A's, convinced Maddie Taylor to be my date for the 8th grade dinner dance. That kid had an iron grip on his life, simple though it was. A future with a shine of polished chrome. What the hell would he think of the pathetic bastard he'd turned into 16 years down the line? I throw my bed sheets in the washer and head for the living room, with my bat still in my hand. I take a few fiery gulps from the amber bottle on the counter, then slam the cork in and flop onto the couch. It's suede, this thing. Can you believe it? A guy like me, with a salary like mine, buying a brand new suede couch he absolutely couldn't afford, to stick in an apartment that he can just barely afford. Of course, at the time, she insisted that it was the only one to get. Serious adult furniture for a serious adult couple. So I'd grinned and swiped the credit card like the dumb, love-struck puppy I was. Now, one serious adult breakup later, I'm sitting here alone, the luxurious feel of a month's pay under my ass. Time passes. Just how long, I have no idea, and my adrenaline cools. My eyelids are heavy again, and the cushion is cloud-like. I feel myself sinking, melting, peacefully away. Thwack! And I'm on my feet, bat raised high, my pulse jackhammering against the back of my eyeballs. I've started to lose track of time. It slipped away from me, bit by bit. My routine continues. Shower, toothbrush, coffee, drive to work, spreadsheets, numbers, graphs, drive home. But more and more, it all seems to be happening on a sort of mental cruise control. No real active participation on my end. I'm interacting with the world through my thick, soupy curtain that keeps me sleepy, out of touch, dulling my senses until an occasional thwack yanks me back to reality. My days are drenched in sickly yellow, like the sun is a distant memory, and my world is lit only by his eye. I'm lonely. I find myself pulling my phone out just to stare at the contact photo. The press of a button, I can hear her voice. After all, what the hell are my pride and self-respect worth when I'm losing my damn mind. I hate this room. I hate this apartment. Every corner, every crevice is decorated with knickknacks, filled with trinkets that I never liked, never wanted. Is there anything in here that was actually my choice? A nervous voice pulls me away from my brain-dead spreadsheet scrolling. Apparently the big guy wants to see me. Crap news, no doubt. I trudge down the fluorescent hallway to his office. On the way, I pass by a framed poster of a rock climber, its caption informing me that today is the best day to be my best self. The big guy is pissed. That much is obvious as soon as I settle into the swiveling chair on the receiving end of his desk. Red, sweaty face, dark stains beneath his pits. He wants to know what I've been doing the last 2 weeks, if there's any figures I can show him, any concrete evidence that I've been doing something resembling work. I answer honestly, I really don't know. He raises his voice, probably trying to intimidate me into subservience, but I'm already gone again, back behind the curtain of yellow fog. 2 weeks? Was that what he said? Is that how long it's been since the nightmare started? His hand comes down on the desk. Thwack! Again, he grits his jaw, verging on a full tantrum, but he takes a deep breath, composing himself, tells me to listen. He's got a brother too, he says, an older one, and if something were to happen to his older brother, something like what happened to mine, well, anyway, he guesses he'd be a little off-kilter too. But time is money, and this is a result-based business, and if I can't find a way to snap out of this funk, well, he'd expect me as a team player to do the stand-up thing and take some unpaid time off. There, he's said his piece. He wants to know what I think. What do I think? Good question. Truthfully, there's plenty that I'm thinking about the big guy. But, being the sane, self-preserving person that I once was, it had never crossed my mind to tell him. Maybe it's time I did. I tell him that a good tailor will know how to let the collar out of his shirt a bit, because right now he looks like it's choking him. He looks like a cherry push pop squeezing out of a cardboard tube. He's upright in his chair now, stiff and straight as a 2x4. There's spittle forming at the corner of his mouth, but no words. Not yet. This feels good. I decide to keep telling him what I think. Where was I? Right. What's the deal with him and Janice from accounting? I don't think there's anything cool about infidelity. Not if you're just going to sneak around with some woman who's fatter and older than the one you're already with at home. What else do I think? Last month at that big client meeting, I think it was total crap to pass my concept off as your own. It was a big pitch, the kind that really could have changed my portfolio, helped me establish a genuine reputation, but he had to go and snatch it with those big, sweaty sausage roll hands of his, which was a mistake on his part, because everyone knows he's too damn stupid to create a pitch like that for himself. That was what I think. Naturally, he's unimpressed with what I have to say. He invites me to leave with a voice that rattles the walls. He tells me to grab a cardboard box from the printer room and throw my things in it. I tell him there's nothing important enough to take, just a stapler, a bobblehead, and a cup of pins. If he wants, he can try to fit them all in his ass at the same time. I really hate this apartment. It's grown beyond a laid-back, complacent disaster and into an active, seething disdain for the carpet, the walls, the ceilings, and everything in between. Now that I'm unemployed, I've got nothing to do but sit here, simmering against every little detail. Like that thing on the bookshelf across from me, that gaudy elephant sculpture. It's tacky as hell, and I despised it from the moment I first saw it in that snooty antique store she dragged me to on what had been a perfectly good Saturday morning. I'd asked her how something so gaudy could be so expensive. She rolled her eyes and told me I had no taste. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't have any taste. Maybe I still don't. But I do have this. Thwack! Little League bat. And I gotta say, that damn sculpture looks much better in 1,000 shards than it ever did in one piece. What else could use some redecorating around here, I wonder? How about that battalion of expensive candles lined up on the mantel? Shit, how many different seasons does this place need to smell like anyway? I wonder if it can get 'em all in one swing. Turns out it can. Espresso machine, bedside lamp, that record player that had replaced my stereo, that full-length mirror that had replaced my dartboard, they all go to oblivion. A gratifying symphony of splinters, shatters, and crashes. 20 swings later, once I've run out of smash-worthy trinkets, I turn my attention to that freaking suede couch. Nothing too satisfying I can do to it with my bat. Should I set it on fire? Nah, I'd probably bring the whole place down. Hell, I'll just move the damn thing. It's a total bitch to get through the front door, but with a little creative geometry, I muscle it out onto the sidewalk. I step back inside, breathing heavily, surveying the new decor of my place. It's a war zone, but at least it belongs to me again, and me alone. Just like that, the loneliness is back with a vengeance. My brother's gone, so is she. Hell, even Cindy from the next cubicle over is a burned bridge now. I've never felt such intense singularity. I'm still relatively young. How long can this go on? I can see my entire future, thwack, stretched out in front of me, like a parched and endless desert, one I'll have to travel alone. I'm not sure if I can make the journey. The barn, the bodies, the Lasso man. They're just a nightmare, right? So why am I suddenly feeling pangs of jealousy for that version of me? The one swinging helplessly in the rafters, losing consciousness, fading into a warm black. Because he had the desert behind him. That's why. 2 rings, 3 knocks. Then I swing the door open, and she looks bewildered. She jerks a thumb over her shoulder, wants to know why our couch is leaned up against the parking lot dumpster. Well, 'cause I put it there. She shakes her head, hardening into anger. Then she puts her palms up, seeming to ask for a fresh start. She asks me to listen, tells me she's been doing a lot of thinking, soul-searching, really. I ask her if she's been doing this soul-searching over at Kevin's house. She recoils at the question, looking hurt, but she seems to know it's a fair jab. She starts crying, and for a brief second, I'm almost taken by the swell of pity. All the complications of the last few weeks can't overcome 3 years worth of genuine goodness. Can they? She says she messed up, says she made a mistake, and a huge one at that. And yeah, the whole Kevin thing was unforgivable, but I have to acknowledge that things weren't 100% one-sided, right? We weren't exactly living in a storybook. She says I'd gotten complacent with my life, with our lives. She'd started to feel like she was drowning with me. And after so long, after so many months of drowning, she'd just had a stupid moment of weakness. I can understand that, right? I don't have to forgive it, but at least have to understand it, right? She's missed me. She wants to try and make things work. She can't make it all make sense right now, but can she at least come in, talk about it, so we can, she doesn't know, be together? I stand there in my doorway, trying to absorb the tear-laden speech, using my body to block her from seeing the chaos that my living room has become. God help me, I do want to let her in. I think about the endless, yawning stretch of that desert, the miserable prospects of walking the whole thing alone. The thought of her body pressed against mine is almost too tempting to pass up. And how much is my pride really worth? In light of all that I've been going through, how much am I worth? She looks up at me with vulnerable eyes, then buries her face in my chest, dampening my t-shirt. I hold her. We stand there. It all feels good and warm, familiar, and thwack, horrible. That's how it feels. I've never felt smaller, more pathetic, less like a man in my entire life. Even while swinging there in the barn, whimpering, spitting, begging the Lasso man for mercy, with my eyes bulging out of my skull. I grab her shoulder, press her away as I answer her question before she can ask. No, she can't come in. We can't just be together. Is she kidding? Does she even fathom the damage she did with that selfish, impulsive crap? how it felt to be torn in two at a point in my life when I was already hanging by a thread? No, she can't come in, ever again. In fact, the thought of her showing up on my doorstep, thinking we might still be an option, makes me sick. I turned then, heading back to face the shattered remains of my living room. She calls after me, tears flowing freely now. She tells me in a throaty sob that Kevin threw her out. Where's she supposed to stay? I tell her she can sleep on that suede couch she loves so much, and close the door. Time passes. I barely notice. The big guy is gone. The girl is gone. My brother's gone. But the Lasso man is very much here. I can thwack, hear his rope. I can smell his breath. Sometimes I can see the glow of his eyes in the corner of my own. He's not through with me yet. Wants to finish his work. I'm inclined to let him. My bat lays there on the carpet. It's 28 inches of aluminum giving off a friendly gleam in the moonlight. I pick it up careful not to cut myself on any of the shattered glass and porcelain scattered around. I grip it with both hands, thinking back to the days when I could still stand the sight of myself. I want to hit something, smash something, take all my nauseating pain, this paralyzing apathy, and chase it off, if even for just one brief moment. But what's there left to hit? All of her knickknacks and decorations are obliterated. All her mirrors and picture frames are in shards. My work laptop is a devastated mess of splintered wires and circuitry, all evidence of my servitude to the big guy, wiped clean. I'm the only one left. Thwack! It's just me. I need a drink. I step over towards the kitchen where a half-empty bottle of Jack sits invitingly on the counter. I pick it up by the stem, about to twist the top off, when something stops me. Maybe it was just a reflection from outside, just a simple trick from my eyes, but the bottle of amber liquid seems to glow yellow, if only for a brief second. I think back to my first drink when I was 17 years old, flumped on a beat-up basement couch at some house party with my brother. We were celebrating a victory. We'd played in our high school's annual band battle earlier that evening, and handily secured the trophy with a pretty decent rendition of Layla by Derek and the Dominoes. We used to spend full weekends in the garage together, the two of us and our guitars, melting the hours like ice cubes in the sun. Why had we never gotten back to that? What could have possibly eaten all that time in between? Well, this bottle in my hand for starters. Suddenly things make more sense, because it takes two to tango, right? And a village to raise a child, and 3 strikes to make an out, and at least a pair of mice to screw in a light bulb. And now, it's past time I got completely honest with myself, being steamrolled by the big guy, getting ripped apart by the girl, losing my brother, and my absolute best friend. It's all been, well, suffocating. Still, my life belongs to me. Since I hate what it's become, chances are I've had something to do with it. Carry the bottle into my newly spacious living room. I flip it around and catch it by the stem, so I'm holding it like a club. Then I toss it in the air, take a quick loading step and swing. The aluminum barrel catches the bottle dead center in its boxy body. Crashing glass, shards clatter against the walls and windows. Fiery liquid showers everywhere. I survey the results, feeling somehow lighter and stronger at the same time. What else can go? What else has been purchasing my days on Earth at bargain price? I spy my monstrous, self-built PC setup, glowing LEDs on the unit, ergonomic keyboard, and a blazing processor fast enough to take me where exactly? All the hours burned, all the money spent, all the life I've lived through that 15-inch monitor. And what do I have to show for it? The sheer immensity of the frittered away time rolls over me, weakening my knees. Suddenly, the glowing LEDs fade from green to sickly yellow. A few swings and some sizzling, splintering plastic later, My knees are strong beneath me again. In fact, I'm feeling better than I have in weeks. I step back into the kitchen and whip open the freezer door, scanning over the frozen goodies that have made me soft around the middle, short on excess breath, sapped of all the energy I had when I was younger. I bat them all like lazily hung curveballs. Frozen fries and burritos scatter across the room. A pint of cake batter ice cream takes a chunk out of the drywall. My cell phone, my beer stock, my mason jar of weed, dingers, every one of them. Ridiculous, wasteful, self-performative nonsense? Probably, but lately, I need all the catharsis I can get. Soon I'm standing in the middle of my living room again, surrounded by the crushed and shattered remains of my former life. It's leveled, swept away. What's going to take its place, though? Anything I want. My new life belongs to me. But of course, I need to put first things first. Had I grown 6 inches? Or is this just how freedom feels? I smack the barrel of my bat against my palm and take one last look around. Then, I step out the front door. My car coughs itself to death unknown hours later. Since then, I've been ticking off the highway miles on foot. But this gentle asphalt hill I'm climbing is the final one. I can feel it in the soles of my feet, the crackling at the tips of my fingers. A yellow fingernail of burning sunlight is peeking over the horizon line as I reach the top of the slope. And there it is, 300 yards off the road. It sits like a decomposing specter, as it always had. A pointed tower extended off the roof, sagging drunkenly to one side, curling slightly back on itself like a giant, spindly index finger, coaxing me to stroll across the swaying glass, like it had something to show me. I accept that offer. 10 minutes later, the grass turns to barnyard dirt under my feet, and the building looms before me. I see it clearly, every knot in the wood, every rusty protruding nail. There isn't an ounce of fuzzy dreaminess to cloud my brain. I'm fully, completely here. I take a tight grip on the handle of the sliding door, fully expecting the same rusty resistance as before. But it coasts open easily, only offering a minor squeaky complaint. I step inside. Scattered hay crunches under my feet, stinking like ancient horse piss. Bright morning sunlight sharply through the gaps between the rotten boards. Dust flecks dance through the rays. It's a spacious, musty room I stand in, and save for the occasional wooden groans, it's completely silent. So I stand here, bat in hand, waiting, alone. But how alone, really? Less so now. The atmosphere of the barn changes. Suddenly the shadows are doing a different dance than before. The creaks and groans are a bit less passive, a bit more aggressive. The massive room around me is suddenly not so spacious. Then there's a loud creak from above. I don't look. I've seen his gruesome, swinging chorus too many times before. They began their chant. He's the lanky, leering Lasso man, got a twirling rope and a steady hand. For a moment, I try not to listen, fixating on the comforting weight of the bat in my right hand. But as their raspy taunts cut deeper into my head, a sudden jolt of righteous indignation lights up my chest. His rope's his brush, the barn's his easel. He's pegged you, boy, for a shut the hell up. And immediately they do. Maybe that shouldn't surprise me. They are dead after all. Forgotten, fading, turning to dust. As for me, I'm alive. Maybe more so than I ever had been. Their creaking slows to a near stop. I stand. I wait. Finally, he comes. He saunters slowly out from the same horse stall as before, gliding slowly across the wall, this time without the theatrical aid of his chorus. My knees are still. He reaches his spot in the center of the closed wooden door. This time I'm not surprised by his ephemeral transformation. Now he's here, in his full, sooty three-dimensional form. Same toothy cockroach sneer below the same droopy mustache. Same leather patch over his left eye. Same crackling yellow glow from the right. His clothes remain colorless, the snake-like lasso hanging over his shoulder in the same casual way. It's funny, though. For all the little ways he appears so identical to the Lasso man of my nightmares, there's one noticeable difference. This one is a lot shorter. We stare each other down as the choir swings wordlessly above us. I shift my bat to my left hand, then back to my right. He brings his lasso around from his shoulder, lets the knot loop drop to the ground with a thump. "Stupid to come here, you jelly-spined weasel. You should have left me alone." His taunting smile disappears. His lips tighten over his cockroach teeth. He begins to swing the rope, slowly at first, back and forth. After a few swings, he gives his wrist a hard crack, sending the loop around in a complete arc over his head, then back down again. At the bottom, it slaps the ground. Thwack! Like a sound I know well. He sneers again, and his voice buzzes with new vitriol. "I'd get steppin' if I was you. Ain't too late to run." "Yeah," I nod, feeling a sudden, improbable sneer of my own. "It is." Now something amazing happens. That glowing yellow eye in his leering left eye, the glare that has struck in my mind like a splinter since I first saw it, flickers, goes dim, and I can see the dark, impotent blackness behind it. He brings his lasso. Thwack! Around again, angrily this time. My sneer grows bigger, and in a force of lingering 12-year-old habit, I tap the aluminum barrel of my bat against the inside of my shoe. This bastard was pretty good with that rope when I was running scared. Let's see how good he is when I'm coming right at him. "You'll swing, boy. You're a weasel, and you'll swing like the rest of them." "Yeah, guess we'll see about that, you gangly son of a bitch." I lifted my bat to my waist and gripped it in both hands. Now, I take a long step forward. Guess we'll see. I lived in this house for 23 years. Just like the past 8,000 nights, as I was going to bed, I reached out to turn off the light switch on the stairwell, the one right at the top of the stairs on the left-hand side as I went up, except it wasn't there. I stopped and looked down. My hand was pressed against the blank wall. I turned around and saw the switch on the other side of the stairwell. Had the switch always been on that side? It had been so long, I'd never really paid attention to where exactly the light switch was. It was pure muscle memory. Reach out, turn off the light, go into the bedroom. I looked down. Oh, I was holding a freshly laundered sheet and pillowcase in my left hand. That stopped me from turning off the light. Instead of switching hands, my muscle memory just told my brain, "Hey, go ahead and turn off the light with your other hand." Silly brain. There was nothing wrong. I opened the door to my bedroom and started pulling the fitted sheet over the mattress. I pulled the cloth straight, straightening out the wrinkles, neatly tucking the corners underneath. I repeated it 4 times, then, with a sigh, I got up and went to the bathroom. I reached to flip the lights on. Blank wall. What the... I extended my other arm. After a second of fumbling, my fingers found the switch and flipped it on. I scowled at myself in the mirror, at the reflection of my bony hand frozen over the light switch. I'm pretty sure that light switch was on the other side, next to the towel rack. Not there. I walked over to the counter and pulled the bobby pins out of my hair. Then I pulled it up into a ponytail, securing it with a green nylon hair tie, and reached down to the drawer to pull out my toothpaste. Except my fingers grabbed empty air. I looked down to find the drawer pulled a few inches lower than I expected it to be. "Geez, what's wrong with me today?" I muttered under my breath. I grabbed my toothpaste out of the drawer and squirted it onto my toothbrush, furiously brushing my teeth. I bent over the sink and cupped my hand, filling them with water, and sucked it up, swishing, and spit it out. Straightening back up, over my shoulder in the mirror, the fitted sheet sat bunched up on top of the mattress. My heart dropped. I definitely put that sheet on. Then I frowned. Did I? Or did I just think about doing it? I turned around, staring at the bunched up fabric, the cute little green polka dot dress, distorted with wrinkles. Then I shook my head and walked over to the bed, flapped the sheet in the air, and then lined up the corners, pulling it down taut, tucking each corner underneath. Looks good. I walked over to the window and closed it, locked it, and put down the blinds. Then I pulled the curtains over them. Without the light of the moon, the room was pitch black, save for the silver and golden light spilling out of the bathroom door. Leaving the bathroom light on so I wouldn't trip over myself, I sat down on the bed and turned on the desk lamp. I pulled my Kindle off the nightstand and opened the novel I'd been reading. Some dramedy about two very different women switching bodies. I read for several minutes, but something caught my eye. The mirror. In the full-length mirror across the bed, I could see my reflection, blankets cozily wrapped around me, cup of water on the nightstand, Kindle in hand. Except something was terribly, horribly wrong. My hair was down. No, I put my hair up in a ponytail. In the bathroom, I was sure of it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten my hair wet in the sink when I brushed my teeth. Unless maybe I absent-mindedly put it back down while I was reading. The neon green hair tie sat on the nightstand. I grabbed it and quickly put my hair back up. Then I stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back, eyes wide. You're just tired. You've had a hell of a day, a hell of a week. The presentation at work, fixing the cracked windows in the basement, all by yourself. I just needed some good sleep. I reached over and turned off the lamp. Darkness enveloped me and felt somehow too dark. Usually there was light from something, even if it was just the blinking white light of my laptop, indicating sleep mode. But this was pure darkness, thick, heavy darkness, like a fog, filling the entire room. Go to sleep. You just need sleep, I told myself. I cuddled up to my pillow, closed my eyes, and began to fall asleep. My eyes shot open. The light. I'd left the light on in the bathroom. Now it was off. I pulled myself out of bed. Hello? Is someone there? Oh, good idea, Hannah. Announce yourself, like every victim in a slasher movie ever. Groping in the darkness, I felt for my phone. I left it on the nightstand, which should have been a foot or two to my right. But as I continued to feel, my hands only fell on empty air. Where the hell is the nightstand? I walked forward with slow, halting steps. Then my toe collided with something. I hissed in pain, but reached down and finally found the sleek, smooth metal of my phone. I turned on the flashlight, and my blood ran cold. My bed, the nightstand, it was on the left side of the room, not the right. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, the white light jittering across the wall as my hands shook. I turned around towards the bathroom, but I was staring at the windows. The curtains were closed tight. I whipped around, and there was the door to the bathroom, on the other side of the room. What the hell? I ran to the bedroom door, turned the knob, swung the door open, and raced down the hallway. The stairs, they didn't lead down. They led up. My flashlight followed the wooden steps as they went up, turned 90 degrees at the landing, and continued upward. At the top, there was a shut door. A door I'd seen a million times. The door to my basement. A dream. This had to be a dream. I pinched myself and screamed as I tried to force myself awake. But I was still standing in the hallway. The hallway that led up to the basement door. I raced up the stairs and opened the door. Or I tried to. It only opened a few inches before the chain lock caught. I thrust my entire weight against the door, pulling the chain taut, but the door wouldn't open any further. "Let me out!" Lights blinked on the other side of the door, and through the crack, I could see something. Something familiar. A hallway with a cuckoo clock, cream-colored walls, an opening that led to a small, wallpapered kitchen. It was my house, and standing in the kitchen was a woman with dark hair pulled back with a neon green ponytail holder. It was me. She held a toolbox and a garbage bag. Something like glass clanked against each other with every step. Then she disappeared around the bend towards the garage. "Help me! Help me!" I screamed. But no one came. I've tried calling the police, tried calling my mom, my friends, anyone. It never goes through, though. It seems like I've got some sort of internet connection, though. I'm not even sure this will be seen, but I hope someone will see it. And I really hope that you can help me. I know it sounds silly, but has anyone ever heard this old poem about the Clickity Clackity? I don't know if it's just something from my small town that they kept alive or what, but I've been trying to do some research about it for the last few weeks. I haven't come up with much, and I'm looking for help. Honestly, at this point, I'm really begging for someone who has some information on this thing to step forward. But this is the poem I'm talking about. In these woods there lives a puppet. It sits and watches all who pass, with eyes of coal and teeth of rust, with skin crackling and full of crust, with wiry limbs, brittle as spent glass. It moves with subtle creaks and cracks. So if you're ever in the woods and see a puppet sitting near, do not look at it, no matter your fear. Just pretend you're okay. That's truly all I can say. In these woods, there lives a puppet. For some context, I live in the southern edge of Wisconsin. My family has always been pretty savvy when it comes to camping, and it was a big thing for my brother Paul and I growing up. We always had fun during family camping trips. But flash forward 20 years, and my parents have since passed on. There was a bad car accident, and the loss hit us unexpectedly. So, as a little remembrance trip, my brother and I had planned a final journey up into the woods that our family had frequented. It's up near the town of Clements, Wisconsin. It's where my family had always camped, but this time we were going in deeper into the woods, just to have a little extra privacy from the normal campground tenants. Plus, we were planning on getting a little drunk, so we didn't want any officers kicking us out. So, we made our plans. We were going to meet at 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon in the parking lot of the Clements Park campground, after which we'd head up north for a couple of hours. We'd found a decent spot in a clearing through Google Map, and we wanted to check it out. After all was said and done, the plan was to head back to our cars on Sunday afternoon. It was just a dumb, drunk, grieving kind of weekend getaway. We both wanted to talk things through, but neither of us could really be described as the going through armchair therapy sort of people. This is just how we handled things. But once Friday came around, things immediately went south. I'd parked my car in the run-down dirt lot of the Clements Park around 2:30. There were a few scattered cars of other campers littered around the dirt field, but nothing really of note. In a way, I'd felt relieved that I wouldn't have to exchange pleasantries with any old family friends. But although I didn't see any familiar people, I did see familiar faces. The trees that had stood tall since I was a kid still remained in their proper places. They held on rebelliously firm to their plots, and were left untouched by time. If anything, they had appeared larger to me that day. They had loomed over me with an intensity that I hadn't felt in years. Either they had grown larger, or I had felt much smaller. With a deep breath, I took in the strong, nostalgic smell of the cypress and pine trees that filled the woods. It had always amazed me that the memory could be triggered so heavily with scent. The smell of fresh trees and dirt had taken me back to simpler times of life, when you entrusted your whole being to the care of others, when you were so little that your parents had seemed unstoppable by the forces of nature. You felt carefree because your parents could protect you. You never had to worry about yourself. Now that I was an adult, I knew that whole premise was faulty from the start. When death arrives, it arrives. It doesn't matter how much experience or wisdom you have. It has always, and will always, take what it wants. After a few minutes, I checked my phone and saw 2 unread text messages from Paul. He wrote that he was going to be a few hours late due to work, but told me to just go ahead without him. He said he'd meet me at the clearing sometime in the evening. I remember feeling disappointed in him. I know it wasn't his fault. He had a rough job. But this was supposed to be our time together. Our time to BS and get everything off our chest. I knew that at the end of the day, there was nothing I could do about it. I just thought, whatever, and kept moving about with our plans. I walked behind my rusted little Honda Civic and popped open the trunk. What was inside my beaten-up sedan was worth more to me than my entire life's work. Right in front of me lay the same beaten-up rucksack that my dad had always taken with us. When he passed, my brother and I found all his camping gear still prepped and ready to go in the garage. At that point, we hadn't camped together for at least a decade. As a man, I held back tears as we found it. I think Paul had too. "Hey, Dad," I remembered saying as I picked up the heavy bag. "We're going on another trip together. Paul will be here soon." I looked towards the dirt path leading deeper into the woods and knew it was going to be one hell of a trek forward. It was pretty well known in our town that the trees in Clement's woods weren't exactly easy to travel through. There were thick patches of dry rotted tree limbs that had entangled and knotted around each other. One bad foot placement, and you'd end up snapping more than just tree limbs. With that in the back of my mind, I started my journey. The first thing you have to pass through is the standard campsites. They were full of beat-up trailers and half-assed tents. We called most of the trailers out there the regulars. They pretty much lived out there during the summer. They were good people, just a little odd. Once you got past most of them, you finally hit the start of Clement's Trail. It's less of a sanctioned path and more of a dusty foot trail. Years of fishermen coming and going had created a thin line of dirt that my family had enjoyed walking through for well over a decade. My brother and I walked down that exact path time and time again with our parents. It was basically a mile loop around a lake that happened to find itself surrounded by jack pines and red cedars that had made up the bulk of Clement's ecosystem. Past that was relatively untouched land. Now, was it legal for us to camp out past the sanctioned areas? Probably not. But what conservation officer would head several hours into the woods on a hunch there might be some buffoons grieving out there? So I pressed forward, continuing northward as I went into the depths of the tree line. Before I knew it, the Clements campground were out of sight and out of mind. During my hike, I used the sun as my marker and kept a good pace. I was actually a little ahead of schedule without having to keep pace with Paul. Incredibly, it was just over an hour of me walking due north that I started noticing something. There was this odd creaking noise coming from the distance just beyond me. It didn't sound like much of anything at first, just kind of like a tree cracking in the breeze. But when it kept happening, always the same distance away and always directly behind me, I started to get an odd feeling creeping up against the back of my mind. Yet every time I turned around to look at whatever was making that noise, I'd see the gentle swaying of green leaves overhead and the sand-colored trunks of the cedar trees, and nothing else. So every time I got that odd feeling running up my spine, I'd turn around and see nothing, then just keep marching on. This happened over and over again. It wasn't until I got to the clearing that something else popped into my head. I hadn't heard a single bird call that entire walk. Aside from the creaking of tree branches and the whistling of the wind, it had been dead quiet. But once again, I pushed it out of my mind. I shifted my focus to setting up the campsite for Paul and I. The clearing we had chosen was perfect. It actually looked better in person than it did on the overhead view from online. It was an almost perfect circle of grass, surrounded by a dense woodline. You could see the sun overhead, casting its dim glow from just over the top of the green canopy. I relaxed my mind a bit, now that I had gotten safely to our makeshift campsite. I went through the mental checklist of everything I had to prepare for the night. I started with the fire. I collected a few big stones that littered the forest floor and formed a little rock pit in the dead center of the clearing. Shortly after that, I made a big pile of dry firewood that I had found scattered around the ground. I did my best to fill the fire pit with the best wood I could find, and tried to spark the tinder with my dad's fire starter. The fire starter went off without a hitch, and it was just in time for the evening sun to start cresting over the horizon. Even though I felt a little rushed setting up the campsite on my own, there was something relaxing about focusing on a single task. I wished Paul was with me, but part of me needed some silence to sort out my own thoughts. The fire provided enough light for me to set up the 3-man tent without issue. Before long, I was sitting by the fire, getting ready to open up the cooler and have a drink. That's when I finally got the text from my brother. "Hey, just FYI, I just got here. I'll be there in about 2 hours. I know a lot of you probably think hiking in the woods in the dark is stupid. You're right, we aren't the brightest tools in the shed, but we had an oversized ego for our capabilities. We'd been hiking and camping on our own for so long that it felt like second nature to us. I just texted him back with my thumbs up and fished out a drink. I sat my back against a broken cedar trunk near the fire and looked at my handiwork. "Here's to you, Mom and Dad," I muttered, before having a sip of my drink. Before I knew it, the cans had gathered next to me, and my eyes had gotten heavy. My eyes were half closed when I heard the same clinking noise I'd heard earlier. It was just outside the clearing, in the darkening woodline. My eyes drifted towards the edge of the trees and focused in on something directly across from me. There in the darkness of the sunless forest was a vague shape of something. It was barely noticeable in the shadows. It stood about 4 feet tall, and it was facing me. I slowly leaned myself forward off the tree trunk, my eyes fixated on the small, dark form. I was expecting it to turn and run away from me. It wouldn't have been the first time that I'd been spooked by a deer in the night. I thought to myself that any second now I'd hear the skittering of the deer hooves as they scampered back into the woods. But that's not what happened. As my eyes were focused on the little shape, it started to walk towards me. And by walk, I mean walk. Even with it being cast in shadow, I could tell that it had the frame of a small child. It was deathly thin and gaunt. It moved with a sense of weightlessness to it. The moment that it passed into the camp's clearing, the fire licked its face with light. Even through my drunken eyes, I could see what it was. It was the face of an old wooden marionette. I felt my heart lurch up in my throat. My body had instantly skipped the fight-or-flight response and went straight into freeze. I could no more lift a finger of my hand. All I could do was watch and examine the puppet's features. The wood was old and weathered, cracks and chips layering its pale skin. The eyes themselves were dark and empty, and the mouth was just a gaping hole full of rusted metal false teeth. It had what appeared to be human hair matted over its wooden scalp. It was just staring at me. Time passed, and it just kept staring. I worked up enough courage to slowly slide my hands towards my flashlight. I slowly aimed the bulb towards the thing at the edge of the camp and flipped the switch. Immediately, the puppet shot its hands up in the air and jittered its way towards me. Loud cracking and popping of aged wood filled the campsite. Its feet had glided its way over the forest floor as if it were floating, its knees bounding high up in the air with every mocking step. The clattering sound of wood on wood jangling in the empty void of darkness still haunts me. I dropped my flashlight and fell into the fetal position, completely curling up. My subconscious told me that I was already dead, and my body had totally given up in response. I counted the seconds in my head, waiting for whatever nightmare was about to befall me. But it didn't. I lay on the forest floor in a tight ball for God knows how many minutes. Eventually, I worked up the courage to take a glance at my tormentor. Through my fingers, I peered into my campsite, praying that the thing would be gone. But the puppet was still there. It was now halfway between the fire and me. The wind was blowing against its hardened skin, creaking its body ever so slightly with every gentle gust. Out of its mouth came a light clicking noise, almost like an infestation of woodworms, all calling out. What do I do? I remember repeating in my head, what do I do? Then I remembered the poem from when I was a kid. I remembered what it said. Just pretend you're okay. So I slowly sat up and kept the puppet in my peripheral vision. It turned to face me, but I did my best not to pay attention. You're at camp. Act like you're at camp, I silently recited to myself. I noticed that the fires of the fire pit had begun to dim. I needed to stock the pit again before the light went out completely. I looked over to the large stock of dry wood I'd collected earlier. I thanked God that I'd been smart enough to make a pile before sitting down for the night. The timber couldn't have been more than 10 feet away from me, but when I went to take a step towards the dry wood, my legs nearly gave out from under me. I was shaking bad. I heard the puppet begin to creak its way back up behind me. Maybe it noticed my fear. Maybe it knew I wasn't acting right. My intuition was flaring up in my mind like red-hot coals, that this thing wasn't just something I could run from. I had to play the game. Get the firewood. Don't acknowledge it. Just get the firewood. I straightened myself up and walked as casually as I could over to the bundle of fallen tree branches and limbs. I picked up a large handful and turned around. The marionette was standing just behind me, its coal-black eyes looking at my face. The clicking noise that was escaping its mouth sent a nearly uncontrollable fear through my body. But I pressed on. I walked in a straight line towards the fire pit, narrowly missing the wooden body of the doll. I took a knee to be near the warm flames and dropped the wood down next to me. Handful by handful, I placed the branches in the pit. The creaking of the doll had made its way over to my side as I stoked the flames. I glanced down at my thigh as the doll placed its thin, rotten hand against me. At that moment, I wanted to jump up and run away as far and as fast as I could, but instead I ignored that feeling. I ignored it as the tears welled up in my eyes. I took a stand near the fire and gathered my strength. I closed my eyes and took one last breath of night air before walking over to the tent. As soon as I walked into it, I zipped the door closed behind me. I saw the silhouette of the puppet standing right on the other side of the plastic sheeting, illuminated by the fire behind it. I finally cried. In hushed tones, I cried as long as I could remember. I went to look at my cell phone, let my brother know not to come down there, to tell him to go back to his car and get the conservation officer out here as soon as he could. But when I reached for my pocket, it hit me. I'd left my phone outside near the broken tree stump. I glanced back out at the shadow just outside my tent. It was facing me. It felt like it could see me through the thin layer of fabric that lay between us. I tried to gather up my courage to walk outside my tent and grab the phone, but I couldn't. I just sat there in my tent till I heard footsteps walking up to the campsite. "Hey, Jules, you up?" I stayed silent as Paul called out to me. "Sorry I'm late, but..." "What the hell is that?" he gasped. I heard the panic in Paul's voice. I watched the shadow as the puppet turned to face him. Its arms and legs jerked violently in the air. Paul turned as fast as he could and ran out of the clearing. The puppet followed him with impossible speed. It glided, its dangling, flailing limbs in the air as it began its chase. Not even a minute later, I heard a horrified yelp, then complete silence. I stayed in the tent all night, numb, broken, defeated. I just continually asked myself why I didn't say anything, why I didn't do anything. By the time morning came, I had left camp, picking up my phone and trying to dial Paul over and over again. There was never an answer. I left everything I brought in that exact spot. I never went back for it. I left those woods in a half daze that I've never recovered from. Before I knew it, I was back in the campground. I contacted the officers in charge of the area, and they conducted a search. They refused to listen to anything I had to say about what I'd seen. But the thing is, they didn't just dismiss it like I was crazy. It was like they'd already known what had happened and had refused to acknowledge it. We never found my brother. I could never take another walk in those woods either. I left the searching up to the police and the local volunteers. But what I can do is ask a question. Does anyone know anything about the old Clickity Clackity story? When I went to college, I made a tactical decision and paid a ton of money to get an apartment 15 minutes from campus. My logic was that if I was close, I could walk everywhere and pay nothing for gas. In the long term, I'd probably save money. This worked out quite well at first. Then they started appearing. The beggars. At first, only one sitting behind a petrol station. Then, in my second year, there were 4. It's my 4th year now, and there are 9. Now, don't take me for some kind of monster, but these people were a massive problem. At first it was fine, just a simple, "Sorry, I got nothing," when they asked for money. Then they started burrowing into the surroundings. A small shack and some bushes, another in a park, and a big one behind the transformer. This was worrying, but not too big a deal, right? It's cold outside. Then the piles started. They would gather up every scrap of trash around, and even started scrounging through other people's trash cans, grabbing anything they could drag as their prizes back to their burrows. They would pile up this garbage and live in the filth. Soon my commute to campus started to stink. Then the rats came. Massive, furry forms, clambering across piles of filth, skittering through the darkness. I was honestly starting to worry for my health, and wondering how they would survive such unsanitary conditions. What bothered me most, though, was the one right off the main road, the road I had to take to get to class. On that road, an old power transformer sat. It was quite an interesting thing. It sat right up against the dirt slope, and on 2 sides facing the slope it had brick walls, and on the other 2 it had a wire fence. One particularly inventive beggar found a way to tear a nice hole in the front fence and burrow in. Now that small area is about 30% trash. With one corner blocked off with sheet metal, he made himself quite a nice little filth shack in there. The rats are particularly bad there too, especially since he's taken to living with the vermin. Whenever I need to pass through the street, I make sure to stay on the other side of the road, as far as possible. This doesn't really help though, since the rats are everywhere on the street. What has me really worried is that machine distributes power to the area, and with the amount of trash and human waste in there, it's absolutely going to start a fire at some point. Then one day, my prediction came true. I stayed a little bit late on campus, using the library to study for upcoming exams. The sun was dipping underneath the horizon, although it could hardly be seen under the dark, looming clouds. A frigid wind blew past, filling my nose with thick, humid air. It would definitely be raining tonight. I hurried out the gate and started my trek back home, a backpack slung over my shoulder. As I turned down that dodgy road, I noticed a thick wisp of smoke rising upwards, only to be blown away by the strong wind. Yeah, I dismissed the smoke. It was probably cold, and started a fire to keep himself warm. I hurried down the road, but as the transformer came into view, I knew I was wrong. Sharp buzzes and electrical arcs were coming from the transformer, and the pungent smell of burnt plastic wafted out. I quickly dashed across the empty road, making my way towards the transformer. I wanted to get a closer look and call the emergency services if needed. When I got in front of the transformer, I was greeted by a truly horrific scene. 7 flaming rat bodies greeted me. Their sharp teeth bit through key electrical wires of the machine, setting them and the trash below alight, casting a dazzling array of electrical arcs over the machine. I reached back to my backpack, searching for my phone. Then it blared out, a guttural scream of pain coming from inside the small shack. I can't say why I did what I did next. My brain kind of shut down and I just reacted. Next thing I knew, I was crawling under the hole in the fence, pushing through rancid trash and God knew what else. Quickly made my way into the small metal shack. Having taken a first aid course, I was hoping I could help the man. A smart person would have just called an ambulance, but me being an idiot, I thought I could just rush in there. When I squeezed through the makeshift door, which was just a hole between the sheet metal and the wall of the roof, I entered a small trash-filled room. But to my surprise, the room was empty. I looked around searching for the injured man, but nothing was there. Just the buzz of electricity. I was confused. I definitely heard a scream. After a few seconds of nothing, I turned around, maybe he was outside, and walked back. Crash! My stomach jumped into my lungs as the ground gave way beneath me. I instantly closed my eyes, shielding my head as I was dragged down into the ground and tossed about by tons of sinking soil and concrete. Eventually, when the impact stopped, I opened my eyes. I was in a dark tunnel, covered in layers of dirt and trash. My entire body ached. My head was pounding. I looked around, but it was pitch black. Fortunately, my dumbass didn't leave my backpack behind, so after some fumbling in the dark, I brought out my phone. The screen had a nasty crack along the length, but it luckily turned on, and with a button press, my torch blared to life, filling the dark tunnel with blinding white light. Motes of dust swirled around me, and the thick air illuminated by the beam of my torch. It looked like I was in an old sewer tunnel, probably a decommissioned one, judging by the lack of running water. Instead, I was surrounded by dull red brick, about 4 feet high. Behind me was a pile of dirt. Above me, the expressway down. I was completely blocked in, sealing me here underground. Turning to my phone, I quickly dialed 911, only to be greeted with a no signal message. Great, I thought. Okay, calm down. I took a deep breath, trying to slow down the drum beat in my heart. This is probably a sewer pipe, which means I can go forward until I find a hatch or something to get out. I took a moment to examine myself, looking for major injuries or broken bones. All in all, I seemed to be mostly fine, just a few minor lacerations. However, what had me really worried was the lump on the back of my head, the dizziness, and the fact that I couldn't smell anything. I rationalized that it was hopefully just a concussion, so I needed to get out and get some medical attention. So up I got, hunched over, and slowly made my way down the dark tunnel. As I walked, the air remained thick with dust, causing me to cough every few steps, leaving me lightheaded. I slowly stumbled down the pipe, with every step fighting the intense feeling of claustrophobia. The walls seemed so close together, every part of me wanted to stand up and stretch out. But the tons of dirt above me pressed down, keeping me hunkered over, filling me with dread. I could swear the tunnel was getting narrower. Slowly, I made my way. Minutes passed. Then, suddenly, I was in pitch blackness. I panicked and slammed my head into the roof, knocking me to my knees and dropping my phone. I fumbled around the floor looking for my phone when my hand came in contact with something warm and fuzzy. With a squeak, pain shot through my hand and I scurried back screaming. It took me a few seconds to get a hold of myself until I could get back to my senses and realize it was probably just a rat. My ragged breathing echoed around me, but it didn't mask the dim squeak. Okay, that's good, right? If there's life, then there must be a way out, I said in a panic. I scooted back down the tunnel, so now I have no idea where my phone might have landed. I spent several minutes trying to find it, but I couldn't. Couldn't find any more rats either. So I did the only thing I could. I scrambled forward in total darkness. I was down in the darkness for a long time. As I stumbled forward, my coughing got worse and more frequent. It was difficult to breathe, and I was practically panting, while my thoughts only served to make things worse. What if I passed an exit only to miss it in the dark? What if I never got out? Would anyone ever look for me down here? Eventually, a small, dim light filled my vision. I scrambled forward, rushing towards the light, leading me to the end of the tunnel. It ended with a sheer drop, about 2 meters down into a larger chamber. The chamber was around 20 meters long and 5 meters wide, lined with several similar tunnels. They fit into a channel and ran down the length of the room, further down into a large opening. Along the side of the room, across from my pipe, sat a rusted metal door. Above the door sat a simple, glowing bulb, barely illuminating the chamber. Relief flooded me as I scrambled out of the pipe and fell into the chamber, slamming hard into the cold stone. I rolled onto my back, staring up at the ceiling for a few minutes, letting the now clearer air fill my oxygen-deprived lungs. Then I noticed it, billowing from the pipe that was now much thicker and dustier with air, and something clicked in me. It's smoke, not dust. Somewhere in the darkness of the tunnel, smoke from the transformer fire must have filled the pipe. I slowly sat up, realizing now that I was in more danger than I knew. Then my heart nearly stopped as a loud noise filled the chamber. It came from slightly ahead, near the larger channel at the end of the room. I started examining my surroundings closer, and there he was, the small beggar living above the tunnel. He lay on his side, clutching his stomach, covered in filthy rags. I hobbled closer to him, examining him more carefully and asking, "Sir, are you okay?" He looked terrible, filthy, completely covered in filth. He looked malnourished with sunken eyes. Looking closer at his face, thin rivers of blood ran from his mouth, and I could swear his irises were blood red and dimly glowing. But he seemed unfocused, almost like he was asleep. Then he screamed again, clutching his stomach tighter. I rushed over to him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck and trying to get a reading on his vitals. As I touched him, he started to spasm, to scream, slam his fist into his stomach. I grabbed his wrist and pinned him down until he stopped trying to hurt himself. Then I heard something horrifying, chittering, tearing, liquid splashing behind me. I turned around to examine the source of the sound. It was his stomach. a now gaping hole spilling out a torrent of long rats. However, these weren't normal rats. They looked like babies, large, pink, with thin patches of fur. I screamed and jumped back. The man contained an unbelievable number of rats, as at least 50 poured out of him. These baby rats started to continue past me, heading towards the pipe, leading down into the channel. I looked at their destination, and my blood ran cold. Thousands of glowing red eyes stared up at me. But most of these sat at least 2 feet above the ground. Then a loud scurrying echoed out behind me. I tore my eyes away from the sea of eyes, peering behind me to see more of these giant rats, cloaked in shadows, quickly surrounding me, pouring out from the pipe. I screamed, "Stay back!" swinging my backpack towards the swarm, trying to scare them off, but they didn't move. They only kept filling in the mass that surrounded me. They were barely visible, except for their blood-red eyes staring at me. Those eerie eyes followed my every move, but they didn't react. Then, when the last baby rat entered the swarm, they shifted, making a path leading from the depths of the channel. Then, it came walking down the path, standing on 2 legs, hunched over about 4 feet tall. A gray-haired rat thing. It was hunched over, supporting its weight on an ancient stone staff. He slowly hobbled down the path and moved to the front of the swarm, keeping watch of me with his hideous eyes. Then, to my shock, the rat began to slowly sway from side to side and began to sing in a soft, high-pitched voice. "O magna, niclem, delecto crescio nostro, do nabis potimus autumn, punit illinus qui illuc averse sunt gratis si, agros venius equinis, carnisium donus nabre, vitam novum dona nibres." After it finished the last verse, it started from the beginning again, but more voices filled in, more and more, each repeating, and soon a chorus of rat voices filled the chamber. Over and over they sang their song, and I found my eyes slowly drifting closed. I couldn't fight it. Then out of nowhere, the chamber began to rumble, small rocks and dirt cascading from the ceiling, as a 7-foot gout of flame burst out of the pipe from which I had entered the chamber. It filled the room with blinding light and poured thick black smoke. The explosion must have scared the rats, because they started to flee, running towards me and down the chamber. Seeing the wall of giant rats charge me, I bolted too, heading towards the door, feeling sharp claws tearing at my legs as I ran through the fleeing swarm. Finally grabbed the handle of the rusted door and yanked it open, bursting into the corridor. Seeing a ladder on the wall before me, I leaned upward. I grabbed the rusty rungs and yanked myself upward as smoke poured in after me. I could barely breathe, but I forced myself up, eventually coming to a manhole cover above me. I slammed into it, knocking it open, and throwing myself onto the cold tar of a street only 5 blocks from my home. I ran home as fast as I could, breathing hard, bleeding from multiple wounds, coughing all the way, and barely staying conscious. I finally got home and started banging on my neighbor's door. He opened it with an annoyed expression until he saw what state I was in. I asked, "Sam, I need an ambulance. I lost my phone." The next few days, I barely remember. Sam got me to a hospital, and I wound up in the ER. They gave me rabies shots, tetanus shots, half a dozen other shots, x-rays, MRIs, the whole works. Thankfully, my insurance covered everything. I told the doctors about the events. I told them that they needed to call the police and investigate the chamber. The police came and had a long chat with me and the doctors, then came to the conclusion that what I saw was PTSD coupled with oxygen deprivation, and recommended a good shrink. Then I was discharged and I made my way back home. That was a month ago. First, I tried to trust the doctors, believing it was all my imagination. I tried, but I'm not so sure anymore. You see, I found myself collecting trash. I didn't realize it at first until trash day, when I couldn't throw anything away. Now there's a little pile in my room. I just can't bring myself to get rid of it. I also found myself humming the Rats tune. I didn't even notice it at first until someone pointed it out to me. Then last night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I could swear I hear them, scurrying deep below me, singing that damn song. I don't know what to do. My grandma's dying. We sat outside her room and my mom was crying into her hands. Dad was absently rubbing her back and staring off into the distance. Her room sits at the end of our house. My mom pulled out chairs from the dining table and placed them all along the walls of the hallway to simulate a morbid scene. Grandma didn't want to be taken to the hospital, so Mom brought the hospital to her. Grandma called out and Mom jumped up, quickly entering the room. She came out seconds later with a perturbed expression on her face. "She's asked for you, Millie." My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't do well with death, especially when it was my grandma. I was close to her, a lot closer to her than my parents even. I stood and entered her room. It was dark in there and just smelled sickly. Her heavily draped room suddenly felt claustrophobic and stifling. She demanded that we leave her salmon pink curtains tightly closed, so only a thin sliver of light leaked into her previously vibrant room. "Millie," Grandma's weak voice beckoned me from the mound of blankets on her double bed. I hesitantly paused before walking closer and catching her free hand. Her hand was as light as bird bones. "Yeah, Grandma?" I lowered my voice. My normal voice would seem too loud in this room. "I want to absolve myself," Grandma whispered, her hand squeezing mine lightly. You don't have to, Grandma. You are a saint," I smiled at her, but I knew it was a grimace. "Need to absolve myself of my sins and my family's," Grandma continued as if I'd never spoken. "It was a different time when we were growing up. We struggled a lot. We lived on a farm. My daddy was a struggling man. My mama just decided that us girls needed to mind our business. Anyway, there was a particularly bad year that rolled into 2 more years. My daddy came home one day with a butcher paper, and he couldn't look us in the eye. We never questioned it, since Daddy was the man of the household. One day, I got curious. I followed him when he went to go and pick up the meat for the house, and..." Grandma pulled her hand out of my grasp and looked away from me. I pulled her hand back, my pulse kicking in. "Grandma," I asked quietly, I don't know what I'm asking. Are you okay? What did Great-Grandpa do?" "Millie, it was human. It was human meat. He saw me and he got so unfathomably angry. But I left. I left before he could whoop me into next week. I ran home and my mama yelled at me for hours about shirking my duties and my chores. Daddy came home with a different colored butcher paper full of meat, and he eyed me silently. I ate it without any complaints, but I could taste that it was different. The other stuff was richer and tasted different." I wanted to recoil, to run away from my grandma, close my eyes against the depravity I'd just heard. But the way she was describing the taste, it made me think of Mom's special supper. She made it ever so often, and she made a huge deal out of it. I wasn't allowed to go out to my friend's place or invite anybody over. I gulped, and Grandma saw it. Her face changed, and she started to wail. I ripped my hand out of her grasp, and Mom immediately opened the door. as if she was standing there. "Millie," she scolded loudly, "you upset her." I blushed darkly and ran from the room, tears and shame bubbling on the surface. Dad tried to stop me, but I shrugged him off and ran to my room. I decided to become a vegan. I think I'll end the post here. Don't judge me too much. May 19th. I told my mom the next day, and she eyed me silently. "No meat?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, maybe not a vegan, but a vegetarian. Still, yeah, no meat." I smiled nervously at my mom's expression. Interesting. So, you won't be joining us for my special supper in about..." She paused and quickly glanced down the hall and back again, as if it was a subconscious action. "A day or two?" I swallowed against the rising nausea crawling up my throat and grinned. "Yeah, sorry, Mom." She nodded stiffly and continued to wash dishes. I stepped out of the kitchen and made my way down the hall before my dad stopped me. "She shouldn't have any visitors, Millie," Dad said gruffly. My heart pounded and my hands shook. I began to wonder if Grandma really had a say in going to the hospital or not. My grandma died 2 days ago. Now we're at the dinner table with plates of food placed in front of us. Mom and Dad had seasoned meat and mashed potatoes and some caramelized carrots. I had a plate full of carrots and mashed potatoes and tried not to look at their food with any type of longing. Not that I'm trying to eat anyone, but my sudden choice of vegetarianism is really out of survival. My mom stared at me as she took her first bite, and the lump of mashed potatoes I ate suddenly turned into a ball in my stomach. I glanced away from her and stared at my plate. My mom started tapping her steak knife against her plate. "You sure you want to stay a vegetarian, Mill?" I acknowledged, looking up at her. Dad was silently eating too, but his eyes were trained on his plate. "Okay, but I went through all this trouble," Mom said, shrugging offhandedly. I see that. It's just I've been thinking about this for a while, and with Grandma dying, I thought a change of lifestyle would be good for me," I said, suddenly now wanting to cry. "Grandma did what she had to do to survive, but Mom and Dad are well off. I don't know why she started doing this, or Dad for that matter." I swallowed loudly and quickly grabbed my water, half chugging it. My mouth was so dry. Can I be excused? I'm not feeling well," I said, my eyes skipping over their plates. "Leave your plate, I'll clean it up," Mom said dismissively, an angry expression on her face. She still hadn't stopped tapping her knife against the plate. The haunting tapping followed me all the way to my room. I rolled myself onto my bed and fell into a fitful sleep. Something woke me up. I quickly hopped onto my phone and tapped schedule post for 20 minutes from now. I was gonna post this earlier, but I was just writing it down to, I don't know, wrap my head around things. I guess the title of this should have been, "Who Have We Been Eating?" I know that posting this will make me seem like a monster, and you'll think of my family as monsters who eat other people. In my defense, I didn't know. My mom and dad, though, go ahead and think about them what you will, but please, don't think my grandma is... I think that's my door.